warm welcome to everybody, and as you say, colleagues from ADASS, Guinness Care, and of course the Home Office. But also for some of you, you'll notice we also have two BSL interpreters. We have a number of people who've joined us today who are deaf or hard of hearing, and we're delighted to be able to offer this to you. And thanks very much, Heather and the team, for making that possible. For those of you who are not familiar with the happy hour format, this is something that the LIN has developed over the last year as lockdown took hold. It's been a very popular way for the LIN to continue its learning and improvement activities online and virtually. And over the last year or so, we've held over 10 of these happy hour sessions, attracting over 1,500 people now to share learning and to look at innovations in policy and practice. And I was really pleased that Heather contacted us because it's a scheme that ADASS are working in partnership with Home Office, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that from Ian and Heather shortly. But it's something that's really relevant also to our sector, as this session will highlight. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Ian, who's going to give you an outline about the scheme. So Ian, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Ian Hall. I am the Assistant Chief Officer and Senior Staff Officer for ADASS. First of all, thank you to Housing LIN colleagues who have taken the baton in terms of organising today's session. This is the final webinar, the final one of 5, which we have hosted over the past 3 weeks or so. And each of those webinars to date has had a slightly different focus based upon areas where we think there is a particular need or challenge in terms of the EU settled status scheme. Just to give you a little bit of background, ADASS is one of 72 organisations which have been funded through the Home Office to provide support around the EUSS scheme. ADASS's role is particularly around engagement and signposting. So we aren't accredited to provide immigration advice, but the role we have played over the last few months is around engaging with a wide part of the social care sector and pointing people towards our ADASS website, where we have lots of information and advice. And also we meet weekly with the Home Office, who are also joining these calls, and we are trying to raise or pick up some of those key issues which colleagues are raising with us via the webinars or via contacts outside of the webinar. So myself and Heather have been attending every meeting imaginable over the last few weeks, trying to really get to grips with what some of the main issues are for people and understand what these issues are. And I think probably fair to say that we are getting to grips with what some of those key issues are. And hopefully, as we bid for further funding from the Home Office to take us through till September, we have some additional time to try and answer some of those questions for colleagues. So I think in terms of the webinars so far, because we're still really in that engagement stage, although the deadline for EUSS applications isn't that far away, we're hoping that whoever attends the webinar and whatever previous understanding or knowledge you have about the EU settled status, that there'll be something in here which you can take away and you can take back to your own organisations. Because we appreciate really that, particularly over the last 12 months or maybe a bit longer than that now, that the response to COVID has really been at the forefront of people's minds. And actually, the EU settled scheme may have been in the back of people's minds, and what we need to try and do is to bring it back to the forefront really, and to try and turn people's attention to it and the kind of support which people will need to apply for settled status. We have on the call with us today Heather Booth, who is the programme manager, which we've brought in from ADASS to manage this project on our behalf. So Heather will be talking soon. We also have some Home Office colleagues who are in the background. So I think they may have been having some issues with the technology in terms of this being a Zoom call, but hopefully they will be able to answer some of your questions via the chat function. But also later today, we'll hopefully have a Q&A session, and they may be able to pick up some questions there as well. What we are saying to people is that there may be questions which we don't have the answers to at the moment, and that is not uncommon. But what we are trying to do is collect those questions, and we will post the Q&A on the ADASS website. So if we don't have an answer today, there'll hopefully be an opportunity for you to have a look on the ADASS website and have a look at those Q&As. I know this session today is being recorded, which is great. We'll also have a link on the website for that, and I'm sure Jerome or Jeremy will have that somewhere where you can all access it. But if you do look on the ADASS website, there are a number of other tools, information and advice on there. And there'll be sets of slides as well from other presentations which you can hopefully access. So I think I'll probably leave it there and pass to Heather, but I would encourage people, please use the chat function, please use the Q&A, because it's only through these webinars and through the engagement that we're doing that we can really really identify what those key challenges are, and that is for myself and Heather to take away and hopefully come back with an answer at some point. So I can't see one raised hand, Jerome, but I'm not sure if you're dealing with that now or if that's for later. But I'll pass to Heather unless Jerome needs to do something with the raised hand.
No, we'll let Heather do her presentation first.
Okay, thanks. Over to you then, Heather. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jerome, can I take back the so I can move this? No, it's okay. You've done it for me. That's great. Thank you. Can you move on one? That's great. Okay, that's super. Thanks ever so much. As Ian said, what we'll be covering in this fairly brief presentation is some of the headlines in terms of the EU settlement scheme. Perhaps for some people listening in today, it may be the first time that you've heard some of these messages, or as Ian said, because we've all been focused very much on COVID, it might be that you knew about this 12 months ago and it's kind of gone into the background of your mind. But there are and have been quite a few changes from a process perspective on the EUSS scheme. So even if you were fairly embedded 6, 8, 12 months ago, there's potentially some new information for you to pick up today. So just putting that back into context, so why EUSS? Well, just to go back, the EU free movement law ceased to apply on the 1st of January 2021, following the UK's exit from the EU. So as part of the withdrawal agreement, it was there to protect really the rights of those individuals who were already living in the UK before the end of December 2020. So what we're in now is a period called the grace period. So this is this section of time where anybody who needs to apply for an immigration status needs to do so. So that's the context. Looking at the last stats from the Home Office, we had, there's just over 5 million applications been made to date. So that's actually a huge success. A lot of people keep asking us through these webinars and other conversations, do we know how many people are actually supposed to be applying? Well, the answer is nobody really knows. So we don't know exactly what that 100% figure looks like. What we do know is that the 5 million or so applications that we've had far exceeds the amount that was originally anticipated. And just in terms of putting that into context, these are number of applications, not necessarily the unique number of applicants. So some people may have made multiple application forms. So there are two different status that can be awarded, and looking at those stats, there's 53% settled and 44% pre-settled status. So just in terms of the difference between those two, broadly speaking, settled status applies to those people who've been resident in the UK for 5 years, and pre-settled is obviously less than the 5-year period. So when somebody's making the application, they don't state which status they want. That's actually awarded by the Home Office. There's lots and lots of data out there. So for anybody who really wants to keep a close track and look at the stats, the government do produce those on a monthly and a quarterly basis. Really helpfully, they're broken down by local authority, and they're broken down into 3 age groups. So that's under 18s, 18 to 64, and then over 64s. So it is actually quite a good way of looking at the demographics and looking at how those statuses are actually panning out across all of those different age groups. So moving on from that, well, who should apply? Well, actually, probably more people in the UK than we actually think. When we talk about EEA citizens, what we mean by that are all the nationals from the EU countries. We mean Swiss nationals, and we mean nationals from Iceland, Norway, and Liechtenstein. So I'll talk about EEA, and those are the groups that we actually mean. So the scheme is designed to be as easy as possible, although we do know for some parts of our community it might be quite a challenge to get through the application system, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, and I think you'll pick up how that context particularly applies to people within this network. So the scheme opened fully in March 2019. It's free to apply. And as Ian said, the deadline is fast approaching us. So the cut-off point is the 30th of June. So we haven't got that much time to go. And as Ian said, we have been talking to an awful lot of people, and actually a lot of organisations have got in touch with us wanting to know more about EUSS and how it particularly affects groups that they're working with. So what we believe at the moment is that individuals with settled or pre-settled status continue to be eligible for benefits, public funds, pensions, but it does actually it is emerging that that's a bit more complex than perhaps was first anticipated, but we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Once somebody has been awarded settled status, they can, if they're eligible, after a period of time, apply for British citizenship if they want to. They don't have to, but they can if they want to. A couple of things really as well, just to focus in on in terms of pre-settled status. That status expires once we reach the 5-year point. So it's really important that anybody that you might be supporting through your work is aware that they need to really keep an eye on that deadline and then submit another application to transfer that status into settled status. So it's not automatic. So that's a really key thing to focus on. The other key thing is that this is a digital status. So again, that might be a challenge for some people in our communities who, so in essence, you're not going to receive a piece of paper through the post that says you've got settled or pre-settled status. This is a digital footprint. So kind of hold that thought, and then how that might have consequences and impact for particular target groups. Can we move on, Jerome? Okay, so Irish citizens don't need to apply. but they can if they want to. So that's another key thing to think about. Just thinking a little bit about indefinite leave to enter and indefinite leave to remain. People might be familiar with those two immigration statuses. So indefinite leave to remain may have been awarded to somebody going back into the 70s, perhaps the resident in the UK before the UK joined the EU. So they may have had a status awarded at that point. What's interesting to consider with this is that those documents are potentially very old. They may have lost those documents. So there's actually quite a lot of benefit in an individual who's got ILR or ILE to actually apply to go through the EUSS, again, because they will get that digital status, but also it does give them some additional benefits in terms of family reunification. So it's something that anybody falling into that category should consider and probably apply, in all honesty. You've also got non-EU family members. So we talk a lot about individuals, but of course this is a family issue. So it's important that people think about the broader family and whether they need to apply and go through this process as well. Another key thing is British citizens can't apply. So if somebody already has that citizenship, you can't apply through to the EU settlement scheme. So it is important that people check and be absolutely sure what their status is, either to make sure they don't apply if they don't need to, but also that they're absolutely sure that they need to apply. So we think there's probably an awful lot more people in the UK that need to apply, and they might not think they need to. Okay, so that's one message that we're really trying to push through our communications. So one of the key things as well is that a lot of people think that if they've been born here in the UK, that they're automatically a British citizen, but that isn't the case. A number of people have asked us about the UK permanent residence document, and even if they have that, again, they need to apply. So as I said, it's what we're trying to push people to do is to really check the status and make sure what they need to do, because time is, as we've said, ticking by fairly quickly. Thanks, Jerome. Okay, so there are 3 key steps really in this application process. What it's really about is proving your residency and proof of ID. So what we're looking for through the application process is to prove of identity, demonstrate your nationality, the length of time that you've potentially been here in the UK, and there's an automatic criminality check as well. So there are 2 processes. There's online. So what we're probably saying is that people who've got their ID documents, they've got everything, it should be fairly straightforward to go through the online application system if you're in a position where you've got access to the technology and you can navigate your way through that. At this point in time, the likelihood, potentially for some of our most vulnerable groups, is that it's probably going to be the paper route or be the way to move forward. I'll talk about why that's the case in a couple of other slides. Residency might be proof of residency might be quite a challenge, but what the Home Office are doing and are saying is they want to make this system work. It's not about refusing people status, it's about making sure they get the status. So if people are struggling trying to find documentation, the Home Office will help with that part of the process. So that's a message to convey to people, is that the Home Office are looking for ways to support this rather than not award an immigration status. So the criminality check, I think people are quite concerned about that, and what they're not looking for are evidence of people who've perhaps had speeding fines, things like that. What they're looking for in terms of that criminality check is where somebody may pose quite a serious threat in terms of security to the UK, or whether you've got very, very serious persistent crime. So again, that's just to try and reassure people that you know, it's the really serious crime that the Home Office are looking to check and to look at reviewing there. Okay, so we talk a lot about vulnerable or at risk adults. We talk about the elderly in terms of the numbers for applications through to the scheme. There's only around about 87,000 or so over 64s that have applied to the scheme, which would seem potentially quite a low number. Over the past 12 months, of course, families have not been able to visit elderly relatives in care homes, so there probably won't have been those discussions taking place in terms of identifying whether people need to apply and actually providing that support. So that's why we're potentially under a huge amount of pressure at this point. Obviously, people without a permanent address, that might be quite a challenge. And of course, we've got people who may struggle understanding the language, or certainly understanding the technicalities of the application process if you can't access the technology. So we do know that there's potentially a huge swathe of members of our community where this will be a challenge. What we also believe is potentially in that 5 million or so that have applied, could be those people who are perhaps at the younger end of the spectrum, who are much perhaps more IT savvy. They're keeping on top of the news, the headlines, and essentially are probably an easier group to target. So we know there's potentially this swathe of people that probably still don't know much about the scheme or know that they need to apply. We know that we've got some challenges as well with individuals with learning disabilities and perhaps people with autism, again, where they might really be struggling to understand the concept of the scheme and why they need to apply. Okay, so we've touched on that really. One of the things to again focus on is that individuals need to make applications. So even if you've got a head of a family that might make an application, what they need to understand is, from a family perspective, they have to make applications for everybody in that family. And also we're trying to remind young adults that they can apply without parental consent as well. So I think we've fairly much covered that slide there. So as you said, the over 65s are very low. Not everybody is known. We know that local authorities will have an idea about who needs to apply for people who are known to them, but again, there'll be a lot of people within our communities that are not necessarily known. Can we move on, Jerome? Okay, so as Ian said at the beginning, we're one of 70 or so grant funded organisations. Now this is the key bit really, that the Home Office have put an awful lot of funding into supporting a national network of organisations who are there to provide that individual support and guidance for a whole range of people within our communities to actually get through this application process. A lot of them will be at level 1. And as you can see from the outline, those organisations have got a good deal of awareness of immigration regulations. They know how to structure letters and provide evidence and support of applications. So anybody that's struggling or anybody that's providing advice to somebody can direct them towards these 70 or so grant funded organisations. If some of those level 1 organisations for the OISC accreditation can't help, there are organisations that have got a higher level of accreditation. So there's plenty of support out there, but through our work and through the networks, we're signposting individuals to go to those organisations and access for support and help to get them through the process. So one of the things that's come up quite a lot is around mental capacity and how do we support people who might be in that position where they lack the capacity to make those decisions for themselves. And over the past couple of days, Ian and I have had conversations with a few more people where, again, we think this is perhaps not quite as clear for some groups as it might be. And the Home Office brought out some caseworker guidance just before Christmas, which does give some headlines there in terms of how that process might work. So that's there for guidance, and also as well, just to point out, there's quite a lot of guidance for local authorities in terms of EUSS, and some of that guidance may actually be useful for some of the networks as well. So who can make applications? Well, anybody who has got power of attorney for the applicant. So anybody who's perhaps got responsibility for somebody's financial affairs. A third party, a friend, family carer, can also make applications. On a very, very practical level though, because this is a digital status, whoever is making those applications needs to be really mindful of keeping records about which email accounts are used, any passwords, unique application numbers, and especially in relation to the fact if somebody's awarded pre-settled status, they will need to convert that a little bit further down the line. Can we move on? Okay, so as we've said, the priority now is really to identify who should be applying and get those applications in. The hard headlines are that if people don't have that immigration status by the 1st of July, essentially they're here in the UK unlawfully, and the consequences might be quite stark for some in terms of whether they continue to access benefits, public funds, and so on. We know there's going to be some late application guidance due from the Home Office, but what we understand is that they're really looking at exceptional situations for people to submit late applications. So we do need to keep an eye for when that comes out. And okay, we've got key contacts. There is the EU Resolution Centre, and there's also a different line for organisations who are supporting applications. And if people are struggling through those, and you're a grant funded organisation like ADASS, and if you go to one of those GFOs for support, they will also liaise directly with the EUSS grants team as well. Oops. Okay, and I think I've clicked and jumped something. So we have got some contact details at the end of the slides. Main government guidance is there. Our ADASS website, as Ian said, will continue to be updated. And the Care Provider Alliance has also produced some really helpful guidance documents as well that will be available on the website. So thank you very much. I know there's a lot to cram in there in a very short space of time. So thank you for listening.
Heather, thanks for setting it out so clearly as well and articulately, and I think the slides are a great help, and I know that we will be sharing those and the recording after this session. I know a couple of people have posted questions into the quick Q&A box, and Ben and colleagues have been looking at those. Rather than dealing with those now, is it okay if we move on to James Marsh, who's actually head of HR at Guinness Care, to give his perspective from an operational side. So James, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. just get my slides going. Just confirm everybody can see that. I think we're good to go. Okay, so as Jeremy said, I'm James Marsh. I'm the
sorry to interrupt, James, already, but we're not seeing your slides. Would you like me to share on your behalf?
Yeah, if you don't mind. I thought I'd mastered the art, but clearly not.
No problem. Just bear with me. There we go. That should be it.
Great, thank you. So on to the first slide, if that's okay. So many of you will probably know who Guinness Care is, but for those of you who don't, Guinness Care is a subsidiary of the Guinness Partnership, who's one of England's largest housing associations. So we're currently operating around 65,000 homes across England and employ about 2,700 employees across the wider group. So Guinness Care itself was formed in 2005 and supports over 10,000 customers and employs about 800 colleagues across a range of settings, including independent living, supported living, domiciliary care, and some of our support services. So I've been asked to come along today to take part in the panel and discuss some of the implications of the EU settled status scheme on the care workforce. Now, that's obviously a subject we could talk about for hours and maybe even days, but in 10 minutes, I just plan to really give you a quick overview of the implications and hopefully some helpful tips that you'll be able to take forward. So Jerome, if you could pop over, thank you. Okay, so I suppose it's quite important really just to talk about at a high level what our obligations are as an employer. In relation to the EU settled status scheme for existing staff, there's no legal obligation on employers to communicate the scheme to existing staff. However, many organisations do choose and have been choosing so far to direct employees to government information, recommending that they apply and provide a lot of signposting informations. This is quite often taken part by contacting directly, maybe writing letters or contacting individuals who you know from your staff team who are EU members, as well as general comms and awareness campaigns. It's important, I suppose, to identify that it is the individual employee's responsibility to apply under the scheme and that there's no obligation upon employees to inform their employer of what the outcome of their application was, or even whether or not they applied. So it's important as employers, we recognise that we shouldn't be asking current staff who are members of EU citizen countries to apply or show their evidence. However, the key thing moving forward is about checking individuals who are in our workforce's right to work from the 30th of June onwards for new employees. So very similar to when right to work checks were introduced within the UK back in 2008, there's going to be no need to do retrospective checks for any individuals who are currently on the payroll before the 30th of June 2021. The key issue moving forward is that for any new recruits that you continue to ensure they've got the evidence to demonstrate they've got the right to work in the UK. So that's either going to be presenting evidence of either their settled or pre-settled status, or alternatively they could be providing evidence of permission to work under the new points-based immigration system, which I'll come on to later on. There's loads of information out there, lots on the government website and many other useful sources of information which can help with communicating that with the workforce. One note, putting my HR hat on, I suppose, just to prompt, is that GP transfers do trigger right to work checks. So if you are in a situation where you are potentially going to be acquiring a new group of staff from another organisation via a GP transfer, they may not have been required to provide their settled or pre-settled status to their existing employer. But if you do take them on via TUPE after June 2021, then they will be required to provide their evidence. Okay, Jerome, if we can move on. So in terms of understanding the impact upon workforce, one of the key things really is to understand the demographics of your existing workforce and the makeup of the people you currently employ to potentially look at the impact moving forward. So we know, based from Skills for Care report back in 2020, that about 7% of the social care workforce is from the EU. So we know that there's reducing numbers of EU citizens coming to work in the UK, and consideration needs to be given to not only what is the reliance within your own organisation upon EU labour, but ultimately other organisations operating in the same sector, and also organisations operating in different sectors, because effectively there's going to be increasing competition for potentially limited resources of people. So we know that typically for health and social care sector, some of our own main sectors for competition are going to be that in retail and hospitality, again sectors that we know that are highly reliant upon EU labour. So in terms of understanding what the impact is, we really encouraging all employers to analyse the data that they hold on their workforce. That could be, you know, what's currently held in the HR system to try to identify how reliant they are, and also you could already be looking to see whether or not there's been a reduction in applications coming through from EU workers, with many organisations tracking and recording nationality of people as they progress through the recruitment process. And also a key note to kind of take away is to ensure that for organisations, our HR systems are adapted and updated so that you can continue to track and process individuals who are on settled or pre-settled status moving forward after June. Okay, on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So just in terms of some headline things to consider, all organisations really should be reviewing their workforce plans and attraction strategies, and organisations may need to spend more time or resource looking at candidate attraction and benefits to ensure that you're attracting and retaining the appropriate numbers of staff you need to run your services effectively. Considering alternative attraction and recruitment techniques such as apprenticeships and training programs. We know full well at the moment that unemployment levels are rising in the UK, though not maybe as highly as we were expecting a few months ago. Individuals really do need to be thinking about how they attract and grow their own talent moving forward, so they can become less reliant upon migrant labour as they may have historically done so. It's important to remember that organisations can still recruit from abroad. So many of you would be familiar with what was the Tier 2 migrant scheme, which allowed UK organisations to recruit individuals from outside of the EU for shortage occupations. So that's been altered and widened now, so that organisations still can continue to recruit individuals from EU member states. However, it's only for, as it previously was, roles that were on the shortage occupation list, which come with, in the terms of health and social care, minimum salary threshold of £20,000. There's lots of information out there. You know, if you were to continue to or want to recruit from abroad, you would need to apply for that sponsorship license to become a sponsor. There's a lot more information available on the government's websites there that I've provided the link to, but also I've provided the link there to quite a detailed document provided by the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, which goes into a lot of detail on workforce planning and thinking ahead in terms of trying to mitigate any impact that Brexit may have on your workforce. I think that's it for me.
James, thanks very much. And I think that's been a really interesting contribution as well. I'm sure Ian and Heather and the team will agree, because actually understanding both what you as an organisation are having to do to prepare yourselves, and it's not just about the relationship with your staff or indeed your users of your services, it's also thinking about the IT systems, your policies, procedures and plans as well, and that bit about the TUPE transfer. I wasn't aware of that. So again, some really good information there. So we've come to the end of sort of our sort of set presentations, and thanks very much for all the contributions to date. Are there any sort of points that Ian, Heather, or James want to sort of immediately share from what you've heard from each other?
Hi, Jeremy. It's Ian here. I think the point I would make, and it's not necessarily from the presentations, but looking at the questions and the Q&A, is that it's really showing the benefit of coming and having this session here, because the questions which are coming up in the Q&A, although some of them are more generally about the scheme, are really highlighting what we thought was going to happen, that depending on which part of the sector we're speaking to, the questions are very, very different. So there's a lot in there around the, I guess, the criminality check, which Heather talked about in her session and in her presentation, and also continued questions around capacity. So I think there are two areas where we need to go in and find out more. We were speaking to principal social worker today about capacity and what we have to do to go away and find out a little more about that. So there is a question in the Q&A about capacity from Laura and about homelessness. I can't answer that. I don't know whether Heather maybe has seen the question and whether she can answer. But the fact that no one's attempted to type an answer in that one means I think it's a one that we have to take away. Oh, Ben's trying to answer it now, so maybe he can pick some up. But I do think it's really shown the value of coming and having those different perspectives. Thanks, Steve.
No, I agree, and I think both in terms of strategically, but also very practical operation things. So, you know, both in terms of benefits, but the impact for people living in temporary accommodation, those who are homeless, who, you know, frequent flyers and frequent sofa surfers and the like. You know, you're probably exposing quite a few other issues that you may have thought about, but actually they're coming to the fore through this Q&A and this session. So that is great. Are there any questions that aren't being answered yet? Let me just have a quick look. We've got a couple of open questions. We've got one from Laura V. Is it possible to elaborate on homeless clients and access to housing when there's a lack of mental capacity? I think Ben is currently answering that one at the moment. So I don't know whether Ben wants to come offline and speak personally. But otherwise, please do continue typing the answer. Are you able to clarify obligation of service providers to check status of existing services users for rights to access benefit service, including housing? Again, another really good question that's being answered. So they will appear in the answered column in the Q&A box. So please do continue to use that. Heather, can I just ask you a question? Because I was quite surprised by the low level of numbers that you mentioned for those who are over 64. I think you said 70-odd thousand were had already submitted an application. I'm aware, and you may know, that the Housing LIN is very much works in the field of housing for people in later life, in retirement housing. So is there any sort of things, bearing in mind what James has said, we should be thinking about for those people in sheltered or extra care or independent living? Is it taking some of the points that James highlights and sharing those with our sector leaders, or have you got any other thoughts?
I think one of the big things is really for the local authorities to latch onto those numbers and look at what that means for their own locality. And I suppose it's quite a difficult one, because in some parts of the country, some local authorities, the demographics are going to vary. I suspect it's probably because the age group don't think that they need to apply, because they've potentially been here in the UK for so long, that I think it's probably bypassing. It's probably going over that, they're just not registering or thinking that it applies to them. And the fact that there's been such a reduction in family activity as well, and family visits, I think that's probably going to have played a huge impact over the past 12 months, because people won't have been having those regular conversations, and applying to EUSS has probably not been at the top of the thinking anyway. I don't know the answer really. I think this is why we need to continue with this communication and engagement, to keep pushing those messages out there as much as we possibly can. The Home Office have been running a series of awareness raising campaigns, and are putting another big push from now. Obviously, they started that campaign at the beginning of March, and that runs right the way through till June. So I think we can just keep pushing those messages as hard as we possibly can through all the networks that we can work with, and hopefully, now that things are starting to look a bit brighter in terms of the COVID situation, we've got more people perhaps starting to to meet with relatives, then hopefully those conversations will start to take place, but they need to take place really quickly, and probably, you know, as I say, push for the postal applications rather than going down this the technology route. So I don't know what the answer is, other than we can keep pushing that message out there.
Because many people on the call, I know we've got Louise from Cornwall on the call, for example, should be managing a lot of sheltered and retirement living where people aren't actually getting any planned care and support. And James, I'm sure you've got similar experiences, but they'll be getting some support outside, either informal support, but they may still apply for either the status. So there are probably, as you say, a number of people hidden, and we will continue as a LIN to have it as a standing item on our weekly bulletins and the like. James, have you got any other thoughts about how your colleagues are reflecting it in terms of, you mentioned you provide a range of services. Any early thoughts about how they're addressing it?
Yeah, I'll be brutally honest with you, Jeremy. As you're aware, I've only been with Guinness Care for 3 months now. So in terms of actually what's been happening from the service users perspective, I'll be honest that it's not my strength. Certainly from the staffing perspective, we've been working hard at that. And I suppose recognising when you put your HR hat on, you automatically think about individuals' right to work and not maybe the importance of joining the EU settlement scheme for the wider access to public funds, healthcare, pensions, which is again maybe another reason why you do see that dip in the older population. But certainly from the staffing perspective, we've been working very hard in ongoing communications with the individuals that work for us to try and include drive as many people to apply as possible if they wish to, but also the kind of upskilling and education that's going to be needed within the workforce from June, when we need to step up and have those additional checks for new members of staff coming through.
Thanks. Yeah, I know Ben's being prolific in answering many of these questions, so thanks very much for doing so. Some really good questions being posed. One of them was around, is there additional resource for local authorities? Ian, any thoughts on that?
Not as far as I'm aware. It is a question that's come up a few times, particularly when we had a session a week or so ago with principal social workers, where they were asking about they were just talking about the gap, really. So the gap in helping to identify people, the questioning around whether that seeking person's consent to apply, providing the information, but also searching back for identification or documentation. So there is no additional resources, no, unless Home Office colleagues are suddenly going to tell us that there is. So this is very much about working within what we've got. We've just come off, myself and Heather were just on a call with providers, some social care providers just prior to this webinar, where we talked about kind of responsibility. So whose responsibility is it in terms of supporting individuals? And I think we very much took the view around there's providers know the people they're supporting the most, can maybe help identify people who maybe need to have a conversation with about providing support to apply. There are the grant funded organisations who can help people through the process. There's obviously a role for social workers there and local authorities if the person maybe does lack capacity and trying to support some areas, some people there. There's also individuals, families, carers, friends who can apply on people's behalf. So I think it's going to have to be a collective effort from across the board, really. But as I say, unless Home Office colleagues on the call can see otherwise, I'm not aware of any additional funding at all for this.
Okay. I mean, there's also Ben, who's been prolific behind the scenes. It's that time of day when children back at home, so I completely understand that. The other thing, which obviously has been, and Heather touched on it, obviously the impact of COVID over the last year may have had an implication about how we'd be able to communicate and highlight some of these issues. Does that also apply to people who are furloughed as well? So does that mean sometimes it may be harder to access people who might be caught up in this because of their employment stages through furlough and that extension as well? Has that come through in any of the other webinars?
I mean, I haven't heard anything about furlough, but that's because our other webinars have been primarily focused upon supporting people who are vulnerable, because that's our funding stream. I think some of the questions around staffing, which did come up via a discussion with the provider group, was around something which James referred to about whether providers can request information from new starters about what their settled status is or whether they've applied. So I just wanted to go back on that, James, because there was something in your presentation about not retrospectively requesting information, and I wasn't sure about that, because I think the provider organisation we were talking to had thought that in the lead up to the end of June deadline, you couldn't actually ask people or ask prospective employees, that question. So can you clarify that, James?
Yeah, so up until the 30th of June, you go off your existing pre-employment checks, and any existing staff on the payroll on the 30th of June won't be required to provide any further evidence of their right to work in the UK. At the moment, and up to the 30th of June, you can insist that individuals apply under the scheme when you've got no right to ask for them to provide evidence that they have applied or what their status is. All you can do is encourage them to apply. And that's more for the wider benefits of being in the EU set of status scheme. It has nothing really effectively to do with their right to work. There'll be no requirement to go back and do retrospective checks on any individuals who are on the payroll from the 30th of June.
Yeah, I think the question which had been raised was people's concerns that they go through the resource of and the cost of recruitment, training, to then find that the staff maybe can't or don't have the right to remain post that date. So that was the question that was particularly being raised, I think.
Yeah, so if you recruited somebody from the EU, or you had somebody on the EU books now, at the 30th of June, you will not be required to go back and ask them. So if their employment would continue, if they haven't joined the settled status scheme, that only becomes a problem for them as an individual if they left your employment and went to seek a job with another employer. Yeah, so it's very much like when right to work checks came in 1998. Everybody that was on the books was never checked. So it's simply now, if you were doing an audit of your employee's right to work evidence, if you employed somebody prior to 1998, you shouldn't go back and ask them retrospectively to provide their documents because they were recruited prior to when it was launched.
Yeah, I think sorry, Jeremy, I'm just following up on that because James makes a really good point, because we were talking about this yesterday on another call with the HSA actually about if there's very little data about people, how will this really impact upon them? And actually, the point raised was this is about people when they're coming to a point in their life where they're maybe in some kind of transition, so they need to apply to rent a house, they need to go to a new job, and then they need to start providing information about their identification or their background. And it's at those points in their life that their settled status becomes more important, because that's at the point where they're having to provide information. So actually, for some people, they may stay under the radar for a little bit of time, but when they come to one of those transition points in their life, that's when it's potentially the impact of not applying becomes more apparent.
Well, that's been really interesting. We've got a few more minutes. I noticed in the chat box that Susanna Young from the National Housing Federation has put something up regarding a publication they've got. We'll make sure that everybody has access to that. And also, if you haven't looked at the answered questions, Ben and colleagues have been writing a lot of information there, but also some useful information, precedents and other things that have been posted. And of course, we will make this available for everybody post the event as well. So if you haven't managed to sort of track and follow all the questions and answers, we'll have that available along with this recording. As I said, we've got a couple of minutes left. Can I just go around our three panelists and just say if there are any final comments from each of you? Heather, do you want to kick off?
Well, thank you, really. I think it's just thank you for inviting us really to be part of this. And what we're really grateful for is all the questions starting to come through, because that's really the key thing, is really understanding what are individuals' core questions that we need to get to that will then help support them. So I think keep the questions coming. And obviously we will have our contact details. There's an email address on the ADASS website. So if people have got more things that they want to ask us, then please just keep emailing and we will find answers to the questions as best as we possibly can.
Thank you. James?
I suppose I'll give one takeaway tip, and I suppose it's very much linked to the information that Heather gave earlier about individuals who will have pre-settled status needing to then apply for settled status. So I suppose regardless of whether that's individual staff members or whether it's customers, it's important, I suppose, that everybody has the systems and the processes in the background in order to track and monitor that, to make sure that everybody has the appropriate status at the time that they need it.
Ian?
Yeah, just one final comment from me. I think if Ben was able to join, one thing that I have picked up on our sessions with the Home Office is that there's sometimes people feel as though before they can make an application, they need the full list of all the identification possible. And actually what the Home Office is saying is, even if you can't get all the information at once, please submit your application anyway. Once your application's in the system, you're in a far better position than leaving it till later in the day, closer to the deadline, and you're still sort of searching around in the background for the right piece of information. The information that you can provide might be enough. So you're far better to support people, get the applications in and then take it from there, and the Home Office will come back to you if you need further information, rather than, as I say, spending a lot of time searching for things which actually you may not need.
Right, well, that's very helpful. So, I mean, I'm going to just draw this to a close and say, look, this has been a really great session. I know we've had about 70 people join us, but we had far more who have registered, and we will be sharing this information with them. I very much hope, Heather and Ian, if you are making further submissions for grant funding, that we can work with you to roll these out further, and perhaps also join with our colleagues at the National Housing Federation as well. James, thank you very much for your contributions. For somebody who's only been in post 3 months, excellent, but I know you've worked in HR for a good few years longer than that, but that was excellent. And can I also personally thank our signers for contributing, so that those people who are deaf and hard of hearing can also access this information. It's really important that this is available for all. For those of you who are regular Happy Hour attendees, our next one is actually not next Thursday, but on Tuesday afternoon at 4 o'clock. I'm sure Jerome will post something into the chat box. It is focusing specifically on 2 providers who have looked at issues around loneliness and isolation under COVID, and the solutions that they've taken creatively to address that, both in terms of resources, but also how technology has played a greater role. Completely different to this afternoon's Happy Hour, but on behalf of everybody and the Home Office, very grateful for this session, and I look forward to seeing you at a future event. Heather, Ian, James, Ben, Karen, everybody else at the Home Office, John and the team, thanks very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.